Absolutely. So it was probably 25 years ago. I was a young, early 30s youth pastor working at a church in a different denomination. And I had chosen to attend a youth pastor summit, they called it. It was a chance to just gather all the youth workers in that denomination, bring them together, and just spend some time investing in them, developing them, leading them, teaching them. It was a really kind of a special sort of a time because the bishop of that denomination had chosen to come and join us in Daytona Beach, Florida in February. And I get it. It was warm in the winter, but it was kind of a big deal because the bishop in that denomination was the number one guy in the denomination, like the president of our missionary church. And for him to take that time and come and spend with the youth workers was just fabulous. And we had sessions and small group times and discussion periods and all of these things. And it was great. There was one day kind of right in the middle of that week that was set aside as just sort of a day to do what you wanted to do what you needed to do in order to be ready to go back and serve teenagers for the next year until the next summit. And as we came up to that day, the bishop began to talk to the guys and gals that were there at the summit, and he would say, "Hey, I kind of want to go down and see NASA. Does anybody want to go with me?" And everybody else was sort of thinking, "I'm going to the beach. We're in Daytona Beach in February," and I honestly kind of felt a little bit bad for the guy. So I said, Bishop, if you'd like to go, I'll go with you. Because I could tell it was really important to him, but also I was pretty selfish in that because I thought if I can get a full day, one-on-one with the bishop of the denomination, like how am I going to lose, right? And so early that morning we got up, we jumped in his car and we drove, an hour or so down south of there. And we did all the NASA things. Back then it was, you got on the bus and you traveled to the different buildings and saw all the different places there on the campus. And we came back and we were just sitting at this gathering of picnic tables that were covered by this awning to get you out of the sun. And Bishop Hershey was wandering around to some of the other displays and things. I was kind of NASA'd out at that point, but I was sitting there with a cold drink and this elderly gentleman here came up and sat down at the table next to me. I mean, the dude he was a kind old man. He was probably at least 50 years old. And I was in my 30s at the time, remember? And he sat down at the table and he struck up this conversation with me. And I talked about my family and he talked about his family. My kids were just really young at the time. And he was very excited. That night he was going to go to his grandson's t-ball game, and he talked to me about how excited he was about that. Now, what I didn't notice was that during this conversation that was taking place between me and the old man, other people started to come and sit at the various picnic tables that were around us. And I was just talking to this gentleman, enjoying the conversation, but didn't even notice at all that a crowd was starting to gather. And pretty soon he looked at his watch. He said, excuse me, I need to go take care of something. And he got up from the table with me. And it was only then that I realized there's like 50 people now sitting at these picnic tables. And he stepped up to the microphone at the platform and introduced himself. And he said, hey, thanks for being here this afternoon. My name is Dr. Story Musgrave. I'm an astronaut with NASA. And that was him. Like he was not dressed in his spacesuit. He was just like in polos and shorts. And I thought, oh man, like I know that guy's name. I'm not like a real space nut, but like I knew Story Musgrave. He was an astronaut, a celebrated astronaut. He'd been to space. He'd actually lived in space for 59 days by the end of his career at NASA. He was the first astronaut to spacewalk from a space shuttle. He's the only astronaut that flew on all 5 space shuttles. Dude's famous. And I thought, man, if I had known who he was as I sat at a picnic table with him for like 20 minutes, I would have had such a different conversation with him than talking about his grandson's t-ball game. Like, I can talk to any of the grandparents in this room right now about their grandkids' t-ball, right? I can't talk to anybody in this room about flying on all 5 space shuttles, I think. I mean, nobody, right? The conversation was so different than it could have been. Today, I want to talk with you about conversations that go differently than they could have gone. If you've got your Bibles, I invite you to open up to Proverbs chapter 15. And we're going to sort of jump around there in Proverbs 15 a little bit. But I want to talk about these conversations. And I'm trusting that we've all had these times where we need to have conversations and we think we know what we're talking about, but we get into them and realize, oh, this is so different than I thought. This is a hard conversation. And a lot of times we rather than have those hard conversations, we choose to avoid those hard conversations. Even when in our minds we know it's going to be better if I get through this conversation, if I just have this conversation. But we tend to avoid those things because they oftentimes center around something that needs to be corrected in someone's behavior, or they center around some hurt that has happened between two people in a broken relationship. And so we tend to delay having those conversations and we push them off. We pretend like they don't need to happen. They don't really need to be there until we're laying awake at night, don't we? And we save them up and then we think about them a lot at night. We think about them when we're mowing our yard and there's nothing else to keep our minds busy. And we just keep stuffing them in there until the hopper just gets too full and we finally cave to the pressure and have the conversation. Somebody once shared a quote with me just a couple of years ago, and it hangs by the door in my office so that I see it every time that I walk out my office door. It's a simple quote. It says, "When we avoid hard conversations, we're not keeping the peace, we're just keeping the tension." It hangs there so that every time I walk out my door, I see that. But it also hangs by my door because when somebody comes and sits down at the table in my office to talk to me, this quote is just over their shoulder. And as I look into their eyes, I can still see that quote in the background. Now, please understand, not everybody that comes to my office to talk is there for a hard conversation, okay? It's not like I'm the enforcer or anything like that. Lots of times I have great conversations, but there are those times that after we exchange pleasantries, I have to say, hey, could we just talk about this so that we would get this right between us? When we avoid hard conversations, we're not keeping the peace, we're just keeping the tension. Now, before we go too much further, I need to make sure that I'm not just talking to myself, right? I need to make sure that maybe there's one or two other people who might struggle with this same part of our human nature. It's still left over from that fallen human nature that was ours from birth before Christ regenerated our hearts and the Spirit came to live in us. Anybody else, maybe in this room, struggle with having those hard conversations? Thank you. North Campus, how about you? Family Life Center, same thing. Online friends, all of us. We tend to avoid those things because they're just tough. And so today, rather than just put off those conversations, I want to offer to you just 4 quick conversation considerations to take into account as we begin to ask the Spirit, hey, is there a hard conversation I'm avoiding today? Like, should I just have this? Now I do want to make clear, this could potentially be the most conflict-ridden message you've ever heard. It could be the most conflict-ridden week in the life of Hope Church. But I would encourage you, just allow the Spirit to put His finger in your heart and say, hey, maybe you ought to just finally have that conversation. Talk about that one and get that one out of the way this week. want to use as our backdrop here of Proverbs 15 as we talk about these considerations, the first of which is our timing in those conversations. And as we consider the timing of our conversations, I want to encourage us to choose that timing wisely. There's a time and place for everything, right? Proverbs 15 tells us this in verse 23. A person finds joy in giving an apt reply, and how good is a timely word. Now let's talk for just real briefly about Proverbs as before we jump into this one. It's kind of a weird situation. Proverbs is a collection of wise sayings. It's got some truisms thrown in there. It's not like a story that we can walk through and see certain steps. And so it's a little bit awkward for us to maybe think about coming out of this with some four considerations about our conversation. But it's valuable because Proverbs 15 is full of these wise sayings about these conversations. This particular proverb is what we would call a synonymous proverb. It expresses the same idea in two parallel lines with a little bit different wording for emphasis about this one. And so as we look at this synonymous proverb, a person finds joy in giving an apt reply. That just means, we find good things, we find happiness as we reply well, as we respond well. How good is a timely word. The problem is when we know that we have to have that hard conversation, there's usually a little bit of emotion attached to it, right? And the longer that emotion has been there, the longer that conversation has been delayed and put off, generally the more that emotion has grown under the surface. And so we realize when we step into that hard conversation that there's quite a bit more behind this than we initially expected. And so it's easy just to jump into the fray, right in there, come in with guns blazing, and our emotions are just so heightened and excited, but that leaves us open to the temptation to get out of hand, doesn't it? It means sometimes that when we start to have that conversation, I've already decided what you're going to say because I know what I'm going to say, and I know you're wrong because I have to be right in that moment. Yes? And so I'm coming in with shock and awe, man. I'm ready to just take over. And sometimes it's better to wait until an appropriate moment. Now, I'm not saying that we need to just continue to delay and delay and delay, but there are just sometimes to have a great conversation, and sometimes it's better to simply wait. The writer of Ecclesiastes talks about that in chapter 3. He says, hey, there's a time for everything under the sun. And one of those truisms he writes talks about a time to be silent and a time to speak. And there are just sometimes it's just better to be silent until we can really be ready and prepared for the Spirit to move in that conversation. These past several years, my wife Amy and I have had the joy of helping lead Merge. It's a series of 6 sessions for engaged and newly married couples here at Hope Church. And it's been so much fun for us to meet with those couples over the years, get to know them. We sometimes chuckle a little bit at the picture that they have of what their marriage will be like. If you're married, you understand, like you go in thinking it's going to be all roses and rainbows and unicorns, and you realize that sometimes there are donkeys and mules attached, yes? And most often I find I'm the donkey or the mule attached to that one. But as we meet with those couples and we share with them about our life of being married for 31 years and the things that we have learned and what the Bible teaches us about marriage, we have this conversation with them. And we say, hey guys, you need to understand there are just certain times that it's best to avoid having that hard conversation. And I think they apply to all of us, not just within our marriage, but within how we interact with our Christian brothers and sisters, probably even more so how we interact with those who aren't believers in our lives. We say, hey, don't have the hard talk when you're hungry. It's just a bad thing. I mean, we talk about being hangry. Yeah, that's real. Don't have the conversation with you're hungry. It's always a good time to have a taco. and then have the conversation. Grab the donut first and then sit down and talk. Meet over ice cream and the Spirit moves, I'm telling you. Avoid the hard talks when you're angry. That's tough. Because the hard conversations, like we've already talked about, are often springing out of hurt feelings and broken relationship. But if we can hold our anger in check, if we can take just a moment to get a breath and then step into the conversation, it tends to go so much better. Avoid the hard talks when you're late or when you're lost. Honestly, GPS is our friend on this one because it tells us exactly where to go, and we're not getting lost nearly as much as we used to, are we? That's not a great time to have that conversation. Last but not least, avoid having the conversation when you're tired. And sometimes that's tough. Sometimes it's just difficult to not be tired. We live our lives at such a speedy pace. And there's always something else coming after us and something else vying for our attention. And sometimes you just have to have the conversation when you're tired. The cool part about this one, we always show this to our couples when we meet with them in Merge. If you put those in order, you come up with HALT. And it's a great time to just stop. Don't have the conversation yet. Maybe have a conversation about having the conversation. Say to the person, hey, I'd love to talk about this after we eat, or after I find where I'm going, or after I'm not so tired. But the timing is critical. Now, I mentioned that Amy and I have been married for 31 years. It was 32 years ago next month that I actually had the conversation with her dad about whether I could ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. And my timing was terrible. It was a day that Amy was moving from one apartment to another. She was moving with her roommate from one place to another. And so, everybody was there. Her family was around. Her dad was there because he had a truck and we needed a truck. And there was just a lot going on. Yet for some reason, in my young mind, I decided this is the day. I'm going to have this conversation today. And we had loaded up her dad's truck with a bunch of her things. And I remember we were walking out of the old apartment toward his truck, and Amy's dad threw me his keys. And there was an audible gasp from the family because Larry never let anybody drive his truck. I don't know why. Okay, it wasn't a nice truck. It was an old beat-up pickup truck. But when Larry threw me the keys, everybody was like, whoa, this is big. Like, he is letting Kent drive his truck. So we jump in the truck, and it was only then that I discover it was not just a manual transmission, but it was like 3 on the tree. Okay? Never driven one of those in my life. I've got the pressure in the back of my mind. I'm going to ask this man if I can marry his daughter. It's a big deal. He's letting me drive his truck. I have no idea how to drive this thing. And so he's sitting next to me in the cab trying to talk me through how to drive this car that I'm pretty sure was not ever meant to be driven, because why would you put all the gears on the steering column? I mean, that's just crazy, right? And so we finally get it backed up. We're coming out of the apartment complex. I stall it, pulling onto the main road, of course. And so all of this is going on. We get to moving down the road, and I'm like, hey, Larry, I got a question for you. And he looked at me and he just grinned. Like he knew it was coming, And for some reason, in that moment, my timing thought, oh, this is a great time to have this conversation when all of this is happening. It was terrible. Thankfully, the Spirit moved, and Larry said, yeah, you can ask my daughter. That's great. But the timing was terrible. Moving on, in Proverbs 15, we find out that it's best to answer gently after listening well. Proverbs 15, verse 1, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Just this last weekend, Amy and Shelby and I were flying back from Texas. Our flight got canceled one day. We're flying a day late. There's hundreds of people that have been affected by this thing. We're all trying to get through the TSA security checkpoint at the same time. And for some reason, the lady, two people in front of me, when she ran her bag through the scanner thing there, in the bin she had put, her bag like she was supposed to, and her shoes and all that stuff. And when it went through the scanner, by the time she went to pick it up, there was water in her bin, like running around in the bottom of the bin. And she was really upset with the TSA people about it. "Why did you spill my water?" And the TSA guy said, "Ma'am, why was there water in your bag? You're not supposed to do that." And she just kept after them, and she kept saying it louder and louder and more angrily. And they just kept coming back, the same, just ratcheting up a little more. "Why was there water in your bag? Why was there water in your bag?" And it was just this perfect illustration of this for me. I mean, it just kept going and going and going. And I thought, lady, don't fight with these people. Like, I'm behind you in this line, and I want to catch that plane because I missed the one yesterday. It was incredible to me to watch that lived out. A gentle answer turns away wrath. They were both sides were lacking gentle answers, let me tell you. And it just kept going. The anger kept getting stirred more and more and more. And in the hard conversations, it's so easy to fall for that, isn't it? It's so easy to fall for that. My goal in the TSA line, I want to be as kind and gentle as I can with those people because they can make my life a disaster. Different chapter of Proverbs has this to say: "Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity." And that was my goal in TSA. I wanted to avoid the calamity, so I was guarding my tongue. How much more so in our daily lives, though? Those who guard their mouths and their tongues keep themselves from calamity. If we want to avoid disaster in our life, we just need to hold our tongues. In the book of James, he writes a lot about how we use our tongues. "Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." That's why it's so important for us to guard our mouths and our tongues. I don't want my religion, my relationship with Christ, to be worthless. I want it to count. I want it to have value and meaning and significance. But the trap is there. If I don't guard my tongue, like we read in 15 verse 1, then I got a problem. But the biggest problem with answering gently is that far too often it's not about the answer, it's about the listening part. The biggest problem we tend to have is that we do not listen to understand the other party. We listen to reply. We listen to see how we can respond back to them. Quite honestly, we listen so that we can reload. And we're not really listening at all. Sometimes when I have to have the hard conversation, I don't take the time to listen to what the other person said because I've already decided what they're going to say for them. And I already think I know what their heart is in that. And I'm just reloading so I can come back with shock and awe on the next one and really put that person in their place. And in those hard conversations, we can get so distracted with what's going on in our own mind and in our own tongue that we miss what they're saying. We allow that distraction to trip us up time and time again. Another verse here from Proverbs 15, verse 8, "A hot-tempered person stirs up the conflict, but one who is patient calms a quarrel." There is something peacemaking about being patient. It doesn't mean that we delay or excuse improper behavior or words. It just means that we're patient enough to hear what the other side genuinely says and honestly to hear their heart. A third conversation consideration involves life or death and the choice that is ours every time we speak in those hard conversations. In Proverbs, we see this: the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. This is kind of a different sort of proverb. This is what they call an antithetical proverb that sets up sort of a comparison that's opposites of different actions. And we want to understand that, especially when we pair it together with verse 28. The heart of the righteous weighs its answers, but the mouth of the wicked gushes evil. I think as we sit in a room together, we all know, and we're holding our Bibles, we all know we want to be the soothing tongue. We want to be have a heart of righteousness that weighs the answers. But sometimes it's easy when we sit in just a room with one other person to be the tongue that crushes the spirit and the mouth that gushes the evil. Going back to my friend James, in the New Testament, we read, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? And that's the point that we have to realize: the same tongue that just sang praise to the Lord may have to have a conversation this week that's going to tempt us towards crushing and gushing. You see, we've been given lots of freedom with our words. We can say anything we want. With our tongue and our lips, we can form any words that we want to say. And that's a tremendous freedom. But with freedom comes responsibility. We can say what we want to, but with that freedom comes the responsibility to use those words well. And if you're like me and you're taking notes right now, you're like, well, Kent, you just had us write the same word twice. And I did that on purpose because it's such a heavy responsibility of ours. Yes, we can say whatever we want, but there's great responsibility when we understand that our words have weight. And it's not just weight, it's like heavy weight. Our words can build or they can destroy. Amy works at a doctor's office right near where they're about to build a great big hospital. And they're starting to put that up, and there's big cranes there, and they're swinging these beams into place. And I'm kind of a nerd, so I enjoy watching that stuff as it develops. But you know, those same cranes, if you position something different at the end of the boom, if you put a great big heavy ball there, those same cranes can knock down stuff too. And that's really cool to watch. I love that part. But just like that crane can either build up or destroy, the weight of our words can do the same thing. And only when we surrender that freedom that we have been given, only when we allow the freedom that Christ brings us through His Spirit living in our heart, only then can our words truly build up. And so it's almost a game that I play with myself sometimes, trying to find every day something that I can build someone else up with. Last week I was sitting here at the church in a situation where I could see one of our high school young ladies working with some younger kids, and it was just awesome to watch her care for them. She'd done some really cool planning stuff with them, and they were having a great time together. And just watching Elena work with those kids, she just looked like Jesus in that moment. And I played my little game, and I picked up my phone, and I messaged Elena's mom and just said, hey, I just want you to know how fun it is for me to sit here and watch her do this. And I think your daughter looks a lot like Jesus in this moment. And it was a cool thing. I didn't think much about it. It was just cool. I thought, if I was a parent, I'd love to hear something like that about my kids. And the response back was almost immediate as Elena's mom wrote back, and she said, well, thanks. You really know how to make a mom cry in an airport. But you know what? That was building up. And it was awesome. And I was so thrilled that I got to do that for her. Our last conversation consideration coming out of Proverbs 15 has to do with knowledge and the understanding that wise words always win. Proverbs 15:2, the tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. One of the things I love about working here at Hope Church is the fact that I get to spend intentional time with individuals throughout the week. And there are some people that I'll meet up with and we'll have a cup of coffee together, and they will have wise words. And I'll come away from that thinking, man, I am a better person for getting to hang out with that guy. And then there are other people that we get together and we're just stupid, okay? We just say stupid things back and forth to each other. We have a great time together. And I get back and I go, hey, that was really fun. But I don't think we accomplished anything in that interaction. And it's fine to have a good time together. It's fun to be stupid sometimes. But in the end, I want to be with the wise person who is sharing knowledge and is challenging me to grow in my understanding of knowledge. I want to be a sharper tool in God's toolbox. If we pair verse 7 with verse 2, the lips of the wise spread knowledge, but the hearts of fools are not upright. If we pair those two together, all of a sudden we see a link between our heart and our lips. And it's pretty apparent right there. Have you ever gotten into a conversation with somebody who has bad breath? It's awkward, isn't it? And you're kind of like, do I know this person well enough to tell them that they have bad breath? Do I just step back? How am I supposed to handle this thing? And you're not thinking at all about what they're saying because it just stinks. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody whose words just stink? They're not speaking knowledge, they're gushing folly. Man, those are even more awkward for me because I'm like, dude, you're a moron. You're just gushing evil and gross stuff right now and your words stink and I think you have bad breath. So I'm just going to step away from this one, right? We want to hang out with those folks who are speaking knowledge, and we want to aim to be one of those people who is speaking knowledge in those hard conversations. It's super awkward when we realize our words are a window into our soul. Matthew writes about that. He says, but the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sex. All of the bad stuff, all the stuff that I don't want a part of my life and I don't want you to see might be a part of my life. And so the words being the window into my soul is intimidating and convicting and awfully cool and intentional for our Creator to set that up that way. In the hard conversations, are we speaking knowledge or are we just speaking our folly with bad breath? If we put those 4 conversation considerations into play, it makes us wonder out loud, how do the words of my mouth reflect the health of my heart? And I think that's kind of the big question for me. How are my words reflecting my heart? If we take all 4 of those conversation considerations and we put them together, we talked about the timing, and we talked about answering gently, and we talked about life or death, and we talked about knowledge. And I am slow enough witted to need help remembering that stuff. And so I purposely took them all out of order so I could put them in this order so that I could say, hey, in the hard conversations, I need to remember these, and the best way I can remember that is to talk. Now, I'm also slow enough witted to have to work on this more than just today. And honestly, I got to be honest with you that I kind of cheated on this morning's message because it's not something that I just prepared for today to share with you. It's really just sharing from my journal of this whole year. You see, each January, I set about figuring out Lord, what do you want to work on in Kent's heart this year? What's something that's just rough edges and needs help? And I allow the Spirit to talk to my heart. And each year I just sort of pick something that I'm going to work on with the Spirit's help throughout the year. And so all of this year, I've been living this thing. And so this little plaque sits on my office window, on the windowsill, and it just says, has the conversation, Proverbs 15. And it sits there because my desk is against that wall, and as I look out the window, which I sometimes do because it's just a window to the outdoors, I'm always reminded, can't have the conversation. Just have the hard conversation. And so this year, I can tell you, I've had some great success at learning how to have those hard conversations. The Lord is wearing off those rough edges, and there's not a lot of those hard conversations just sitting in the hopper that I feel like I have to worry about all night. But I don't always get it right still. Several months ago, I got a phone call from a friend here at Hope, Randy, and he called me. He was out of state. He had a question for me about something that was happening here at the church. And for some reason, in that initial phone call months ago, I decided that Randy was mad at me because of something that had happened here at the church. And I just decided that in my head. He called on a Monday morning. And so I looked at my window. I saw, I can't have the conversation. You got to talk to him with those 4 conversation considerations. And I decided to put that conversation off till the end of the day on Friday. So for the whole week, I worried about how mad Randy must be at me right now. And I worried about how I was going to have that conversation. And I thought all the way through it, and I thought, if I say this, he's going to say this, and I'll come back with this, and I'll put him in his place this way. And if I say this, he won't have anything left to say. And I was miserable. I thought about that every night as I was trying to sleep that week. I thought about it when I would come to the office. I put it on my to-do list each day that week. So I thought, if I just have this on my list to do today, I will make myself have the conversation. I was finding all different sorts of things to do so that I wouldn't have time to call Randy back. Friday afternoon, it was after 3 o'clock because I generally do a walkthrough of the main campus building at 3 o'clock on Fridays just to make sure we're ready to go. And I remember completing that, and I couldn't think of anything else to do in my work week. And I finally sat down in the fellowship hall, just me. I thought, well, I got to call Randy. We got to deal with this. And I called him up, and he picked up right away. Hey, Kent, how's it going? Good. Hey, man, I just wanted to get back to you about that conversation. He said, what conversation? I said, well, you called on Monday, and you were seemed like you were kind of upset, and I just wanted to finally sort of get this worked out between us. He was like, what conversation, Kent? What are you talking about? I said, well, you called about this thing that you heard about happened at the church, and you were really upset about it. He goes, you thought I was mad about that? I don't always get it right, okay? Randy wasn't mad at me all week. I was pretty sure Randy was mad at me all week, and I lived my life in misery because of a broken friendship, I thought. And Randy was like, dude, you're a moron. I'm not mad at you. Will you join me in the adventure of having the conversation? Let's pray. Father, I thank you for people that are way smarter than me, way more spiritually minded than I am. Folks who maybe don't struggle with having those hard conversations. But Father, I do pray that you would find openness in our hearts today. That if your Spirit might put its finger on a conversation that needs to be had, might we remember to talk to each other with those 4 considerations we find in Proverbs 15. Father, we love you, and we're thankful that you love us even when we're morons. In Jesus' name, amen.